welcome to a special edition of the Norse Benchwarmers podcast. I'm your host, Alex Perez, joined by co-host Josh Northcutt and director Andy Edwards. This special edition today will be an NKU fall sports preview, where we'll take a look at the fall sports you'll see on ESPN Plus this season, like women's volleyball, men's soccer, and women's soccer. And who better to have on than the play-by-play man of all three, Matt Sexton. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. I really appreciate getting to chat a little bit about fall sports. It should be a very interesting fall for sure. And just kind of excited to get back on campus and get back into the rhythm of things.
Absolutely. So we will go ahead and start with women's volleyball. Last season they went 11-18 overall, 7-11 in conference, but 8-6 at home. So my first question is, what difference do you see the only 10 home games this season versus the 16 last season impacting the team on the season?
That's a good question. I think, last year was the first year of the new scheduling matrix in the Horizon League, where outside of your geographic rival, you were playing the same team twice, back-to-back days at the same venue. So I think it'll be interesting to see how those numbers shake out this year because, I think watching them play last year, I don't know if home or away made a huge difference in the way they played. I think, talking to Liz Hart last year a few times, a lot of it just kind of had to do with consistency of the way they kind of put it all together. I think on their best day, they were as good as anybody in the Horizon League. But then the next day, maybe they just didn't hit as well, or the other team just played really well and they would lose. And it didn't feel like home or away had a whole lot of impact in that. It'll be interesting. Obviously, only having the one non-conference game at home right at the very end of the schedule in Miami, and it's the back end of a home and home with Miami. That's not unusual. It's kind of been weird that they've had a couple of tournaments the last couple of years. Typically, those things run every 3 or 4 years. So they typically don't have a lot of home non-conference dates, but I think maybe that was part of the thought process for Liz when she was putting together the schedule is, hey, if we're going to have success, especially considering, they've got the trip to Milwaukee this year to play them twice up there, we've got to test ourselves on the road in the non-conference. So I think putting together the schedule they did where they've got to go on the road and find a way to play consistent volleyball, I think it's going to be very important. I think we'll really know a lot about this team by the time we get to see them for the first time in late September.
And looking at that schedule now, is there a game you're looking forward to most calling or one you're looking forward to most watching?
That's a good question. I don't even remember which games I signed up for. I probably should have wrote that down. To me, as you look at the schedule, the road games obviously are really important. I think the road series that's probably the biggest test is the trip to Bloomington. They play Indiana. They also play Western Michigan and UTRGV. That'll be a really good test. I think that's their strongest group of road contests. I think we're going to find out a lot about this team right out of the gate in the Horizon League. Their first 3 Horizon League contests are back-to-back with Cleveland State, who, of course, won the Horizon League tournament last year. And then Wright State, the team that was the number 1 seed, who got upset in the semifinals, to everybody's surprise. I think we'll know. Then that weekend, to me, if you can go 2-1 out of those 3 matches, I think you're going to feel like you're in a better position this year going into it. And then, obviously, that trip to Milwaukee, October 10th and the 11th, I think is really important to get a split. I think they're really good. They're really well coached. I think if you can go up there and split those 2, I think you're going to be feeling pretty good about where you're going to be in the standings.
And this team lost Joy Banks, Tori Houston, and Ali Sipsky as they graduated. So can you just speak to how big of a loss that is to overcome for the team?
It's a big loss. I think they all had different skill sets that gave something different to this team. Obviously, Joy Banks, your big hitter and leader of the team, just felt like she was one that was kind of rallying the hitters and trying to get them, motivated in a match maybe where they weren't hitting as well. Tori Houston, a phenomenal setter. Those are, worth their weight in gold in volleyball. You have to have somebody that can set and set effectively, and she was also a great leader. And Ali Sifke, someone who, when you look at her hitting numbers, maybe they don't line up with like Banks. Obviously, Banks is one of the outstanding hitters they've had recently. but she was very good defensively at the net. A lot of blocks, a lot of key blocks late in matches when they needed somebody to come up with a big block. She was there for that. So I think it will be a big hole, but I think when you look at really the rest of their core coming back, as far as we know, because the roster wasn't updated on the website, so we're going to assume that everybody else is back. And then that group of 4 freshmen that they're bringing in, I think is, I think that's a really just another outstanding wave of talent that, again, you don't replace your seniors, but you hope that enough people can kind of step their game up a little bit to maybe soften the blow of losing 3 players like that.
That pretty much leads to my next question. What players do you see taking that leap into kind of like a leadership role? And then what young players do you see making kind of a rotational impact?
That's a great question. Those 4 freshmen they're bringing in, you've got Daisy Cluxton, another Cluxton coming in. I think they're high on her right out of the gate. Not going to be surprised to see her have a critical role coming right in. Lucy Hyde coming in from Baden, just across the river. Abby Pickard, setter. So you got a freshman setter coming in. Does she jump right in and start as a freshman? We don't know because obviously we haven't had a chance to see them practice. But and then Ashley Sess, there's your middle blocker. There's somebody that can kind of take what Sifke did and kind of take that role. I think those 4 freshmen, I remember talking to Liz after that was announced in the fall, and she was incredibly excited about that group. I think I won't be surprised at all to see at least 2 or 3 of them, if not all 4, have major roles right out of the gate. I think anytime you have a year where, I don't want to say it was disappointing, I would say Liz would probably say that, right. When you don't make the Horizon League tournament and you're a team that expects to be not only in the tournament, but they're at the end competing for a championship, I think when you can bring in that kind of talent, it just raises the competition level in practice and just says, look, I don't care if you're coming back or not. If you're not doing the things you need to do in the offseason, level your game up, we're going to put one of these freshmen or all 4 of these freshmen on the floor, and maybe we'll have some growing pains with freshmen out there, but at the very least, we're going to be very young. So, to me, maybe the most interesting thing is those returners, like who maybe didn't like their role last year, didn't get to play as much, wasn't happy with the way they played, because I'm sure the staff gave them all kind of directive in the offseason, like, look, you have to be able to do this, you have to be this level consistent, you have to hit at a certain level, or we're going to put a freshman out there and give them a shot at it. So it's going to be very fascinating to see the makeup of the 6 or 7 that start when we get to the opening match of Horizon League play.
It'll definitely be interesting to keep an eye on. Josh, I know you had some questions.
Yeah, I'm going to throw it to Andy first. He just let me know that he had a question. So, Andy, go ahead and ask yours.
Yeah, so we're coming into the 2nd season of the new rule in the NCAA of the no doubles and then the double libero that you're going to have to do. Are teams starting to get used to this kind of rule? Because I know last year people were kind of on the edge about the doubles and the liberos, all that kind of stuff. Are teams starting to get into the groove of this thing? Is that going to be something that NKU is going to be able to use against to their advantage, stuff like that?
Andy, that's a great question. I'll start with the second part first about the double libero. I talked to a lot of the coaches last year as they would come in and kind of got their thoughts on it. There were only a couple of schools I saw all season long between games at NKU and games over at UC that implemented the double libero. I think, there are times and places for it. If you have somebody who's a really great server, but maybe they're not as good a defender, it's an opportunity to get them on the floor to serve and then get them back out and put in a second libero to be your defender, to the person that's going to be doing all the digging. So I think as the rule continues to go on, I think we will see schools try to maximize this, in this case, 8 that you can get on the floor on a regular basis by using both liberos. I think there will be some coaches, because coaches are stubborn, I can tell you from experience, there will be some coaches who just won't use it. They won't like it. They think, nope, we're going to continue to do it this way. But I think for coaches who have, and, with a young team, especially you're bringing in a freshman setter, you're bringing in Daisy Cluxton, who's a libero, like that could be an opportunity there to kind of work her in. As far as the no double contacts, I'm sure the schools that come into NKU are thrilled by that. One of the things I learned last year is that the coaches hate coming to NKU. They feel like the level of officiating here doesn't match up to, and that's not necessarily, it's not NKU's fault that that's the case. It is simply because a lot of the other schools in the Horizon League are very close to like Big Ten schools. So they get Big Ten officials that rotate in when the schedule works the way it does. For whatever reason, that doesn't seem to be the case here. So it feels like coaches come in expecting to have to use their challenges to try to get calls reversed. I don't know if they did put in the new replay system, or I know that it's been talked about they were going to have it in before the men start, so that could totally change all that. But I think from an officiating standpoint, the getting rid of the double contact rule, or at least modifying it, there are still things you can't do, I think makes the game easier to officiate. I think the game is so fast now. I think that's just one less thing the officials have to be constantly worried about. So I think overall it's a good change.
Yeah, definitely. Josh?
Yeah, so you mentioned it was kind of a disappointing season. First losing season since 2017, missing the Horizon League tournament. What do you think needs to be improved on the most in order for that to not happen again?
The coach and me, just immediately, the word that comes to mind, and I'm sure Liz would say the same thing, is consistency. We talked about it a little bit earlier. This is a team that can beat the Milwaukees of the world. We saw it. And then, they would turn around and maybe lose a match to somebody that they shouldn't lose to. And it really comes down, I think, even beyond consistency is hitting consistency. You look at their hitting numbers from last year, and I have them somewhere in the stack of paperwork. They were 7th in the Horizon League in hitting percentage at 183. Wright State was first at 257. So that's a 70-point difference in hitting percentage. Now, Wright State obviously had some amazing hitters, and that's why that number was so high. But that's just a huge difference over a 5-set match to be 70 points on average worse than your opponent. That means you're going to have to dig really well. That means you're going to have to not have a bunch of service errors because you're not going to be able to give those free points away. You're going to need those. So I think consistency is a big thing. And the other thing I will say, too, is I felt like there was more general parity in Horizon League volleyball last year than any time, at least since I've been following it. It just felt like on any given day, somebody in that league, because over the years the way people have thought about the Horizon League is it's the top 6 teams and everybody else. Like, it's just the way it is. You hope to battle against those top 6, and you hope to pick up a pair of wins against everybody outside of the top 6. Last year it felt like that top 6 raised their level a bit. They were in matches against the top teams, and it felt like the top teams, even Wright State, I mean, we saw it. Wright State got beat on their home floor in the Horizon League semifinals. Nobody thought that was going to happen. It just felt like those top really 7 or 8 teams, you could throw them in a hat. And if somebody could put together 3 or 4 matches in a row where they just played good volleyball, they could win. And yeah, I think that probably is why it was so disappointing, is that NKU didn't get a chair at the table. They didn't get into the Horizon League tournament, because I think if you'd asked Liz Hart, I think she would have thought, hey, if we get the 6th seed, we got a shot. We can win 3 matches. We can put our best volleyball together. They didn't make it. I'll be shocked if that happens again this year. I think they will refocus. I think they will really harp on that consistency, and I think we'll see them back in the Horizon League tournament this year.
And then I know it's kind of hard to do without actually fully knowing the roster because, again, as you mentioned, wasn't updated, unfortunately. But if you had to put a guess of knowing what you know, what would be the ceiling and what would be the floor of this team?
That's a really good question. I think if you're looking at a best-case scenario for this group, I think your freshmen come in and contribute right away. I think your returners all take a big step forward. I think there's the bitter taste in the mouth of the returners that, hey, we know last year wasn't what we expect. It wasn't what our fans expect. And I think they kind of put it all together, and I think they get up and back into the top 3 or 4 in the Horizon League standings. And really, if you're there, you're kind of where you need to be at the end to be able to pull it off. Worst case scenario, they don't play very well on the road potentially, and obviously having the games in Milwaukee, that's a tough place to go play. Maybe they struggle a bit with the excessive amount of road games, and they kind of find themselves in the same situation as last year where they're battling for that last spot. I think if I had to put odds on it, I would say it's much more likely that they're going to lean toward the best case scenario this year. That coaching staff is so good, and they've got a lot of talent, and some of that talent, for whatever reason, didn't play as well as maybe they had hoped last year. I really think they'll have a bounce back year this year. I think I would be very surprised if they don't end up in that top 3 or 4 and be right in that conversation to win the Horizon League tournament at the end of the year.
And before we move on to men's soccer, I just want to add that, as we mentioned, they have fewer home games this year, but we will be showing on ESPN Plus the Miami, Ohio game on September 20th, the Cleveland State series on September 26th, 27th, the Wright State game on September 30th, and October 31st, November 1st versus Green Bay. So if you want to tune in, make sure you do. And I'll throw it back to Alex to move on to men's soccer.
Absolutely. Very excited about that. Moving on to men's soccer. Last season they went 3-6-7 and 2-3-4 in conference. So we'll start with the good. Only 3 games, not within a single goal game, but 2 games with only 2 or more goals, unfortunately, on the bad side. So I would say, what's the key to making this a complete team and not just one defensive?
I bet that was all Tom Poitras thought about all off season long. Like, they defended as well as anybody in the Horizon League, and there were times during the season where they defended as well as anybody in the country. They just couldn't score. Now, I think probably part of that was they knew maybe that they were not as offensively gifted as some of the other teams in their league or on their schedule, so they played a style that accentuated the strengths of the team, which was the back line and their goalkeeper, Nick Lemon, who was phenomenal all season long. I think that's probably not the way Tom Poitras wants to play overall. I'm sure he wants to get forward a little more, and I think that's probably what the focus in the offseason was. If you look at their roster, there's a lot of new names on it, and I think my guess is that he is going to he did try to bring in more offensive talent in the offseason. He's got some talent coming back up front that maybe didn't get as many looks, but were very effective in converting them. And I think they would like to try to play forward a little more this year and score some more goals, because in the end, you got to score. You can't play. I mean, they had 7 ties or whatever it was last year. That's a lot. I mean, that means you were in all 7 of those games. But if you turn 4 of those into wins, you're probably playing in the Horizon League tournament instead of on the outside looking in, or 9-4. That's even aggressive. They finished 3 points out of the last spot. They just needed to turn 2 of those into wins, and they play in the Horizon League tournament. So, offense, they've got to be able to score at least a little more regularly this year, and hope that you defend even close to as well as you defended last year.
And then, what games are you looking at on the schedule to kind of define how the season turns out?
It's going to be interesting. I have my schedule notes here. I think they've got some interesting non-conference games, I think, to kind of get an idea of where the progress is. To me, that exhibition against Kentucky is really interesting because they've got 3 or 4 transfers from Kentucky on their roster now. So that's always a little bit fun. Plus, anytime UK comes up here for anything, whether it's an exhibition or a regular season contest, it's going to be packed. Like, fans are going to come out. So it'll be a fun environment to play in front of at Scudamore Field. But again, there'll be a little extra something in it for the UK players who maybe want to try to beat Kentucky, albeit an exhibition. You got a couple of really good non-conference home games. They've got Belmont on September the 6th. Belmont's always really solid. And then they got Xavier coming across the river on September the 23rd, another one that's got a little juice to it. So I think that's really great. But if you want to look at like the stretch of the schedule, to me, there's 2 big road trips. They've got the trip from September the 30th to October the 11th. They got Bowling Green non-conference, and then at Detroit Mercy and at Wright State. Those are the 2 teams that finished tied with them in the standings last year. So can you get 4 points out of those 2 matches and maybe separate yourself from those 2 teams? That would be great. And then the schedule makers did them no favors. Like the last 2 matches of the season, they go to Milwaukee on October the 31st. They were tied for 2nd last year. And they finished with Purdue Fort Wayne on the road on November the 4th. And they were tied for 5th. I mean, that match, if you look at it, could very well be the winner goes to the Horizon League tournament, the loser goes home. Like that, they were kind of in that position in the standings last year. So it's a tough schedule. And those non-conference games, I think, will help get them ready for that stretch. But they're 2 big road stretches to me that they've got to find a way to, at the very least, get results. If you can get draws in some of those matches on the road, I think it'll put you in a really good position. But then you just got to win at home.
Absolutely, and looking at the roster, not a ton of players lost to graduation, but as you mentioned, a lot of new players coming in. So are there any of those players that you can give us a better look at, or you have your eye on coming into the season?
Well, it's another case where we didn't get a lot of information on some of those other players. And if there are any sports information people out there, let me just beg of you, please stop removing players from your website when they transfer somewhere else. I understand why you do it. There's hard feelings when players transfer to another school. But for those of us who have to try to do research and we go to try to find a bio of a player and they're just wiped off the face of a website where you know they were on the roster, that's incredibly frustrating. So please stop doing that. I don't care how you have to hide them, but I should be able to find them in Google. So that's my soapbox. Having said that, I think the key departures, Nick Lemon obviously is a huge departure.
Right.
He was so good last year and was such a unifying force in the back. Two relatively big offensive contributors last year, Tyler Murphy and Jonathan Cohen, both gone. But even Cohen, who was 4th in points last year, had a goal and 3 assists. So again, they're going to miss him, but it's not like you're losing somebody that had 6 goals and 6 assists, and who was 4th in scoring. But, you look at some of those additions. Alex Cron coming over. He's a really great story you might want to look into, even though Kentucky wiped him off the website other than like one photo. There is a really good article on WLKY's website, talks about how he overcame leukemia as a child and was able to become this great soccer player at Louisville St. X. So that's a really cool story there. He's someone you have to think is going to be in the running to be the starting keeper this year. He has some experience in the Louisville City Academy program, so that'll be interesting. Alex Kapik, transfer from Akron, has spent some time with FCC2. That's another thing that's really interesting is some of these transfers are people who have spent time in the FC Cincinnati Academy. We obviously know that FC Cincinnati 2 plays out here at Scudamore Field. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of curious to see if that's going to be a recruiting trend, that maybe some of these kids are coming in here to play for FCC2 or FCC's Academy. And they're like, hey, this NKU stuff's pretty cool. Maybe I need to transfer and come here. So that'll be interesting. Silas Borgman, another transfer from Kentucky. And then an in-conference transfer, James Maxwell, who had 5 goals and 2 assists last year for Purdue-Fort Wayne. He's on the roster this year as well. So clearly they're trying to go out and get some offense, and they kept it right here in conference to poach somebody from a team that they'll be playing the final game of the regular season against. So that'll be fun to have him have a chance to knock his teammates out of the Horizon League tournament potentially.
Never really thought about that FCC familiarity. It'll be interesting to see how that changes things. But Josh?
Yeah, so you answered most of my question there. What exactly they're already needing to improve on? Obviously, it is the goal scoring. We talked about that even a lot behind the scenes when talking about the team last year when we were doing the broadcast. So I'll just ask you, for them to get over the hump of finding a winning record, because it's been a little bit of time. What is the most important thing outside the obvious, if that makes sense? Yeah,
that's a good point about the winning record. The last time they had a winning record was the COVID season that was played in the spring of 21. They went 7-2. They hosted the Horizon League Championship game right here. We had it on ESPN Plus. They lost 1-0 to Milwaukee. And they haven't been back to the Horizon League tournament since. That was the last time they went. And their record since then, 6-11 in 2021, 4-11-2 in 22, 4-10-3 in 2023, and 3-6-7 last year. That's not good. It's not good enough for a program that has had a lot of success. And Tom Poitras would be the first to tell you. I'm not saying anything on here that he would not be saying as well. And he's a great coach. He's won here in the Horizon League. He's won outside of the Horizon League. That he has spent the whole offseason, thinking, all right, we found a way to put a system together that we can defend. We've got to find a way to attack without compromising that, because that's the other side to it you see so often in men's soccer and colleges. When you decide, all right, we're going to play forward, we're gonna go to 3 in the back, and we're gonna bring that extra wing up, and we're gonna maybe go 5 in the midfield and try to bring 2 of those guys up and give us basically 4 up top. That can come at an expense, because now you're really counting on those guys in the back to be able to defend, or you're counting on your midfielders to be able to drop back and play assignments. So, it's easy for me to say, well, they just need to score more goals, because that is the answer. But they have to find a way to do that without giving up that defensive structure that was so effective, because, you look at their number of goals from a season ago, and, they only scored 17 the entire season out of 16 matches. That's not good. You don't need to be a soccer expert to figure that out. But they only allowed 21, which is great. But only IU Indy scored fewer goals on the season. And, IU Indy was 5-9-3 overall last year. You don't want to be there. So, you look at the team with the lowest rated team with a winning record last year was Purdue Fort Wayne. They scored 25 and allowed 19. So that's 8 more goals. That's not a ton. Like that's doable. Like without giving up that defensive side. So that's the biggest thing is how do you play more aggressively without just selling out and potentially opening yourself up to play 4 to 3 shootouts, because those are not good for coaches' sanity either.
And then you mentioned, obviously, the expedition on August 16th. Will that be the first time you get to see the team? Because I know sometimes you get a little bit behind-the-scenes type stuff from players, coaches, and stuff like that. Or will that be the first time you actually get to sit down and kind of look and see the changes in person?
Yeah, that'll be the first time I get to see them. You know, over the years, I've never, to be honest, I haven't asked to come to soccer or volleyball practices. There was a time where I couldn't even get to women's basketball practices. That was not an option. It has been for now with Jeff Hands in charge, and I'm very grateful for that. I've been to a handful of Darren Horn's practices. He's awesome as far as giving us behind the scenes, and it makes a huge difference because, and I will say, Bob Sheehan, and we're going to talk about women's soccer in a few minutes, like he has always been great to come up before matches and we can talk a little bit about, hey, what is it looking like? What are you seeing? Like, and gets a lot of, maybe not stuff that I can use on the record, but a lot of background information that, I at least can give me a little better insight to what the team is doing. In an ideal world, I would love to get to go to practices for every sport that we call here, because it makes my job so much easier if I can actually see it with my own eyes instead of having to kind of just see it or just watch it matches, on the road or whatever it may be. But as most people know, with my schedule, I'm not even sure that would work out if I was allowed. So, there's also that. But the Kentucky match will be a good first chance to see what it looks like. But the other thing too is exhibitions, every coach treats it differently. Some coaches play it like we're going to play our regular lineup, we're going to play our regular rotations. Other coaches are like, all right, this is the chance for everybody on the roster to tell me why you should be in the starting 11 for our first match. So you also have to take it with a grain of salt. Plus, how Kentucky decides to play it also has a big impact. If NKU comes out and wins 3-0, maybe everybody's ready to punch their ticket to the Horizon League Championship. That might not necessarily be an indicator of either team's plans for the season.
And then before we move on to women's soccer, we will be broadcasting 6 games this year for men's soccer. August 21st, the home opener versus Union Commonwealth. September 6th versus Belmont. September 13th versus Green Bay. October 18th versus IU Indy. October 21st versus Duquesne. And October 25th versus Oakland. So 6 games, plenty of time and opportunity, if you can't make it out, to be able to watch on the ESPN Plus broadcast.
Yeah, be sure to be tuning into that, and we will move on to women's soccer. A wildly successful season for them. Went 12-7-1 overall, 8-1-1 in conference, and came up just short in the Horizon League Championship. So my first question is, how does this team continue that momentum and kind of get back to where they were last season?
I'm sure that's exactly what Bob Sheehan is hoping for. Another year where they lose in the Horizon League Championship, another year that they probably feel like they were playing 11 on 14. Another referee's decision gives Milwaukee a championship 2 years in a row, that a penalty kick decides the match. And it's a shame because Milwaukee's really good. But to me, as a biased opinion, I think we don't need to be handing them championships. I think they can earn those on the field. And I really feel like NKU kind of got robbed in both of those championship games. Bob Sheehan won't say that publicly, but I can do that. But having said that, they've got a ton of talent coming back. Now, we're going to talk about, I'm sure, some of the talent they lost, and they lost some phenomenal talent. But they've got, when you go down the roster and you look, they've got a large core of this team. They've got most of their top scorers back from last year. And they're bringing in some really talented freshmen as well. To me, they might have the best returning core of any school in the Horizon League. I think it's just going to be more of the same. I think, though, they're going to come in with that same focus that they always have. I think Bob Sheehan is going to go down, if he's not already, which he probably is because he's obviously the only coach that program's ever had, as he should be on the Mount Rushmore of coaches here at Northern Kentucky University with what he's done over that program over the years. And he's also should be on the Mount Rushmore of just human beings because he's absolutely one of the best guys as well, which makes it even easier to root for that team. But you look at who they've got coming back. I'd be shocked if we're not seeing them right there at the very end. Even though the Horizon League in women's soccer, the top of the league, is really, really good. I think they can be as good as anybody this year.
Yeah, you mentioned it. This team loses Kaya Vogt, Lydia Self, among others, but returns Shay Shipley, Lily Yorty, Emily Dorshing, and Kylie Anderson, just to name a few. Can you just speak to how huge having that familiarity back in return is for a team like this?
Oh, it's everything. I mean, you look at their scores. I mean, Yorty was first in goals, first in assists on the team last year. Kylie Anderson, second in goals, second in points. Dorshing, fourth in points. Erica Cornett, fifth in points. Megan Belrose, sixth in points. Caitlin Evans tied for seventh in points. And then you have Megan Gessner, who came on at the end of the year, and basically, it felt like it was kind of a wide open competition for goalkeeper all season. All of the goalkeepers on the roster got a swing at it. And then about 6 or 7 matches from the end, Gessner took the net and didn't give it up and took it all the way to the end, and she's back. You have to presume that she's going to be starting in net, barring injury or somebody coming in that just takes the job. But that's a huge chunk of your offense. I mean, your defenders in there as well, and your goalkeeper that's going to be back from the team that played in the championship game last year. We don't want to downplay who they lost, though. Lydia Self, obviously an all-region player, Horizon League Defensive Player of the Year. I think to the average fan, you don't think about how great she is because she was the fixer. If they screwed something up, she was back there to clean it up for them. Maria Wafering, who transferred in a couple years ago, was another just rock-solid player in the back. Maybe didn't get the accolades itself got, but was really good back there. You mentioned Kaya Vogt, someone who could basically play on all 3 levels. She could go up and score. She could hold the midfield down, or if they needed her to drop back and defend, she could do that too. Sophia Wilmus, someone who kind of battled through some injuries, but was also another offensive target. They lose her. And Tristan Cross, who was a goalkeeper who for a while had the starting net, lost it at the end of the season. She transferred to Wisconsin Parkside in Division II, so not back on the roster. But I can't imagine there's a ton of teams that have the kind of depth back that this team does. And maybe more importantly, like Kayla Rollins has finally graduated. Some of the other standout players for Milwaukee are finally gone. They obviously are still going to be really, really good because they recruit really well. But it just kind of feels like this group should feel like they could be the favorite going into the season.
Absolutely. And so what games are you looking at in the schedule? Because you mentioned that the Horizon League is obviously not just a walkthrough conference. So which of those games are you really looking to kind of define that they're exactly where they need to be as they were last season?
Not a surprise that Bob Sheehan put together a really challenging non-conference schedule because we've talked about it many times. He believes that you've got to prove yourself for the Horizon League play. And that 3-game stretch in early September, to me, is what stands out in the non-conference. You go to Athens to take on Ohio University. And then the Riverboat rivalry is back on the regular season schedule, which is someone who's called matches at both UC and Northern Kentucky. I'm super excited about. It's a UC team that should be really good this year. They're going to be in the mix in the Big 12. But it's great to have that as an official contest. You get a little more out of it than it being an exhibition. So good to see that everybody kind of got together and made that happen. And then EKU on September the 11th. But then you go to the conference schedule, and it starts with Milwaukee, to me, at Milwaukee, September 28th. The winner of that match could be hosting a Horizon League tournament. NKU hasn't hosted it since the COVID season in 2020, spring of 21. It would be huge to get to play them a second time this year in Highland Heights instead of having to go back to Milwaukee again and trying to win up there. Horizon League semifinal rematch against Detroit Mercy on October the 19th. That's a huge one. That Detroit Mercy team, people shouldn't be writing them off. They were really good last year, and they gave NKU all they wanted in that semifinal. That should be really good. And then, last game of the season, Wright State on October the 29th. Wright State's program's kind of been, I don't want to say down, but they haven't been like what you expect the last few years. They've been closer to the cutoff line of the Horizon League standings instead of being kind of up in the mix. So we'll see what kind of roster they put together, but it's more fun when they're good, and that last game of the season really means something. So we'll see kind of how that shakes out, but it's always going to be a tough match when you play your rival. So that'll be how they wrap up the regular season, and they'll hope to have that bye on Tuesday. And, they would really love to get to go home and stay home and play the Horizon League tournament in Highland Heights this year.
Absolutely. We're hoping for that. It was so switching gears here, it was just announced that assistant coach Steve Bornhofer is leaving NKU after 15 years. So can you just speak to how huge of a loss that is, especially this close to the season?
I think that's a huge loss. That coaching staff, along with Terry Gruel, they've been together forever. I mean, that is got to be, one of the most continuous coaching staffs here. I mean, Brian Nestor over in the tennis program, probably up there as well. Those guys, they've worked together for so long. And for those who don't know, because honestly, I would included me until right before we did this podcast, but Callie McKinney was the coach at Bellarmine, and on the 15th of this month, she was hired by SMU as an assistant. So it's very odd for a job to open up like that late in the summer, but it kind of makes sense in this case. So Bellarmine had to try to find somebody quick, try to find somebody relatively local, because people weren't going to want to uproot their whole lives and move to Kentucky, right at the end of the summer. That's kind of tough. So I'm sure, we went to Bornhofer and say, hey, do you want this? And of course it makes a ton of sense. He's had a ton of success here as an assistant on this program, and somebody who knows the area, knows how to recruit this area, which is really big, because I think that's where maybe you'll see even more impacts as the next offseason, because, I'm sure he was one of the guys that, Bob Sheehan was counting on as being a top recruiter. And now you're going to lose that guy. So it'll be interesting to see if the staff brings anybody on. Obviously, if any of their players who've recently graduated might have any interest in getting into coaching. We've seen that a little bit in women's college basketball. I think a couple of the former Purdue Fort Wayne players have immediately stepped into assistant roles. So, maybe somebody who's a recent graduate would want to come on maybe as an assistant this season. Or, maybe they just go with two and kind of assess the situation in the offseason. But, yeah, I'm sure it'll be a big loss. I'm looking forward to talking to Coach Sheehan about that when we get to see him next. But, when you've had that kind of coaching continuity, it can't not be a big loss. Whether it impacts on the field, my guess is probably won't, just because they know what they're doing. But I think he'll definitely be missed, but I know he'll do a great job at Bellarmine, and wish him certainly the best of luck down there.
Absolutely. Wish him the best. Josh, what do you have?
So despite the 12-7-1 record, they started very slow, 1-5. How do they avoid that slow start this year? I'm assuming having these players come back will definitely help with that.
It will, but I would say, not that Bob Sheehan doesn't want to go 5-0, 6-0, but the one thing we talk about, and we talked a little bit about it already, is he wants to load up the non-conference. He wants to test this team. Like I mentioned, the 3-game road trip at Ohio is always good, always in the running in the MAC. You've got Cincinnati, who I think would be shocked if they don't finish the top half of the Big 12 this year, and Eastern Kentucky. You don't schedule those teams if you're looking to go 5-0. Like, you can go out and play a couple Division II schools, and you can go out and play, smaller D1s that you can bring in here and give them some money, and you can beat them 3-0, and everybody loves it. But that doesn't help you beat Milwaukee in November. That's what that first part of the schedule is. Now, I'm sure he didn't want to go 1-5 in those games. There's no question. I'm sure, you don't win as many games as Bob Sheehan does without thinking, hey, we can win all these games if we play well. But I think when it comes down to it, whatever they can get out of that non-conference, win, lose, or draw, if it helps them against Milwaukee, if it helps them against Detroit Mercy, he's not going to, in the end of the season, he's not going to care really what they did in those games. It's about how they play. If they play great at Cincinnati, they could lose 3-0. But if they play the way he wants them to play, and they get exactly what they want out of that match, he won't say he's happy about it, but it'll be mission accomplished. So, yes, I'm sure he would love to go through and win all their non-conference games and go, 19-0 in a regular season. But he's always going to schedule to get his team ready, and that means sometimes having to play teams that you probably aren't going to beat. But it's about how you play. It's process over result. You have to play well to make sure that you get something. Because if you go out and you play bad and then you lose, that was totally a waste of time. If you play well and lose, you do the things you need to do, then yeah, you don't tell your team you're happy about it, but as a coaching staff, you are satisfied that you got what you wanted out of it.
And that, you mentioned how competitive the Horizon League is going to be. Getting 4 of the last 6 games at home this year, is that a benefit in your eyes?
Oh, for sure. I think playing here playing at home, playing on the turf, because not everybody has turf, most of them do, but I think there is a huge advantage to getting to play here, and I think that wrapping up the season with a bunch of home contests, kind of the opposite of the men's schedule where they're having to go out on the road, I think that's a huge advantage. And I think, again, the one thing they're looking for is home field advantage in the Horizon League tournament. They haven't had it since 2020. Of course, they lost that final to Milwaukee in penalty kicks, which was maybe one of the all-time best soccer matches I've seen here and all the time I've done these games. It's so, because the travel in this league is so tough, because the big games are at Milwaukee and trip to Green Bay and Detroit, and it's just not easy to travel in this league. So if you can get a stretch at home at the end of the season, your legs are going to be a little fresher, you're going to get to sleep in your own bed, you're going to be able to get the prep that you want to get, and you're not on a bus for hours and hours, I think it's huge.
And then the last question, obviously we've talked a lot about the Milwaukee. We talked about the situation where the refs potentially gave them the win. What needs to be fixed or changed to get over that hump and become Horizon League champion?
You gotta play better, because that's the thing is Bob Sheehan, if I talk to him and say, why'd you lose those games? It won't be, well, because the ref cheated us. He would never say that. That's just not the kind of guy Bob is. It just comes down to just being better. I mean, the 2 years ago, I think the discrepancy, the gap ability between where Milwaukee was and NKU was greater. NKU held on tooth and nail to get to the end of that one. They lost 1-0 on the late penalty. But to me, that was a heck of an effort. I think last year, NKU moved up maybe 2 or 3 notches, and I think Milwaukee moved up at least 1 or 2. You got to remember that Milwaukee team won their Horizon League semifinal game 7-0. 7-0 in a Horizon League semifinal. And here's NKU right there with them, dead even, and then the penalty kick gives it up. So, I think the one thing I think has helped them is that Bob Sheehan is an amazing coach, and he has done it all. And I think when it comes down to game planning for one match, I'm not sure I'd take anybody else in the Horizon League over him, and men or women on either side. And I think the hope is that the talent gap will have even closed further with the graduations of Rollins and Higgins and O'Regan, that now, yes, you'll have that good game plan, but you're also, from a talent standpoint, maybe if not even, maybe right there. So, I think it just comes down to, one, hopefully getting to play it at home. That would really be nice. But 2, I think talent-wise, they're all going to be another year better. I think it comes down to that. I think, you can game plan, and nobody's better than Bob Sheehan. But if you have the talent to execute that game plan, I think you put yourself in a position to be able to win those big games at the end of the year.
And if you want to tune in, you can catch every home game for women's soccer. August 21st versus Austin Peay, August 24th versus Mount St. Joe, August 31st, Morehead State, September 18th versus Oakland, the Horizon League opener, October 4th versus Robert Morris, October 9th versus Cleveland State, October 19th versus Detroit Mercy, and October 25th versus Youngstown State. So plenty of opportunities if you can't make it down here to NKU to tune in and see this wonderful soccer team who's got very high hopes, as Matt has mentioned.
Yeah, didn't know it was possible. I'm even more excited about all these sports that we've talked about than I already was. So we're definitely looking forward to that. Be sure to come and support the teams if you can. But again, if not, we have all these opportunities on ESPN Plus to watch and support from home. So be sure to do that. But that will do it for this fall preview on the Norse Benchwarmers podcast. Matt, thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate that. And thank you, Josh and Andy, for being here as well. And then be sure to subscribe to the Norse Benchwarmers page, because we plan to and hope to do more of these shows in the future. But until then, Norse up, everybody.